welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chaney podcast. I am your host, Nathan Chaney, and today we're talking with Bart, a fellow DFW resident here in Texas. We run into each other at a lot of events in the industry. It's a big industry, but it's also a small one, and really happy to get Bart on today. We caught up and talked a little bit at Manifest and had some time, and we arranged this and said, let's get together and talk and maybe share a little bit more about Bart so that everyone can hear and learn from what he's done. So Bart, welcome to the show. I'm excited to talk a little about your experience and get some of your expertise out there for folks. So welcome on. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, first of all, Nathan, thanks for having me on the show. And it's kind of funny, right? Because we probably originally met somewhere on the other side of the country, although we live less than 30 minutes from each other, right?
Yeah.
So that's the funny part. But yeah, just a little bit about myself. I'm currently, as you said, like an advisor. I'm an industry expert. I've been in supply chain pretty much my entire career, over 30 years now. As a lot of people already know, but didn't originate in the US, right? I'm originally from Belgium, started my career there in supply chain, and then a lot of work in logistics. I moved to Australia, came back to Europe, was in England for about 4 years, and then I moved to Texas. My wife's originally from North Fort Worth. We decided to come here to raise our family, so we moved here for personal reasons, but I've been here now. I've always kind of focused on global supply chains with global companies, but Texas, as you know as well, is a great place to be. Very happy to have focused my career on supply chain, and we'll talk about that. The path wasn't always obvious in what I did. It's kind of been a windy road that I would say I kind of came into maybe a little bit by coincidence, like a lot of us older folks have. There wasn't supply chain really when I went to college, but I'm very happy to be in it. And I just love the whole supply chain kind of ecosystem, logistics. It's one of those things is great people, great networking, and that's a lot of what drives me.
Awesome. I'm excited to dig into it a little bit. Let's back up a few years then and just talk about Bart the kid growing up. What was that like, the family situation and those experiences that ultimately, of course, influenced a little bit of who you are today. But let's maybe take a few years back.
Yeah, growing up, I had the good fortune. My dad studied civil engineering. He was very entrepreneurial. At a young age, he became the CEO of a large construction company who, at the beginning, wasn't that large, but he was able to grow it in the 70s, which was the golden age of construction in Belgium, to one of the largest companies in Belgium. And so I had a really good example of someone with an entrepreneurial spirit. So at a younger age, I was very fascinated by a lot of different things. I think at a certain point, I was very fascinated by anything that had to do with space travel. I remember probably being 9 or 10 years old and doing a dissertation about the space shuttle, and thinking like, wow, that's something that eventually I want to be part of, and maybe I am now in a little bit, because space shuttle, as you remember, was also, you could say, that's a big transportation vehicle, because that big cargo space that they use to transport things into space. So it's kind of like logistics. Although I don't think I've ever had aspirations of becoming an astronaut. I think that's like one of those one in a billion kind of opportunities. But then when I was probably 12, 13 years old, my dream was to become more of a kind of marine biologist. I was a big fan of Jacques-Yves Cousteau and all those scuba diving documentaries that you saw. Very fascinating by kind of life below the sea level and things like that. A lot of adventure. And then, to be honest, later in my later high school days, I probably wasn't quite as clear. I probably thought I do want to do something similar to what my dad's doing, but it wasn't very clear. Went to school, studied economics and management at Catholic University in Leuven in Belgium, the second oldest Catholic university in the world. Not necessarily exactly having it figured out, but I thought it's broad enough and it provides enough opportunities. But I think what I've always had was the opportunity to go for something and look for something that I had a passion about, and then really applying myself to it. I think it's very important for people not to necessarily have figured out what you want to do, but I think it's very important that you create a passion for it. And I think the great thing of being in a country like the United States is that there's no limitation, one, to your passion, but there's also no limitation as to what the topic of your passion is. I mean, you can be I'd say the most passionate person about snowboarding or skating or whatever. It doesn't have to be something that's obviously businesslike, and you can become incredibly successful. And that's something that's not very easy to do in other places in the world, but that's something that's obviously great opportunity in the US. That's why I think this is still the best country in the world with the most opportunities. So be passionate. Think about what really drives you as a young kid. And even now, right now, I'm going to be 56 this year. A lot of times I still think back of what creates my passion, and passion at a level like when you were 12 or 13, where you go like, you get up in the morning and it's like maybe you're going on a hike with your friends or you're doing something really fun, and getting kind of almost like that I wouldn't say butterflies, right? But that kind of excitement in your tummy. And if you can get that in a job,
Hmm.
I know it sounds kind of corny when people say, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life, but it's really, really true. And so go for that passion. Don't limit yourself, but kind of rules that other people put on you. But also, if you pick something, be passionate about it.
I would agree, and from the perspective that I have, it did take some years of just slogging it out as an inventory analyst and a coordinator, and just working the gears of the logistics industry to see what it's all about, we'll see what I'm passionate about, find my place, find my voice, find some sort of something that makes me unique or different, and so. As much as I like to tell people similarly today, hey, find what you're passionate about and do that, and it'll be amazing. And I'm feel really fortunate to have found that now, but definitely 3 years ago, I didn't have this. I didn't know what my passion was. I didn't know what my voice was in the industry. It's only been in the last year, really. And so there, I have to kind of remember that I was kind of just one of those people that was a little bit wandering around, following where the stream takes me or where the next role or title or pay increase is, until kind of reaching the spot that I'm at. And it sounds like you're a big advocate for trying to get to that passion sort of career as soon as possible. Um,
Yeah, I would agree with that. But on the other hand, I mean, I went through the same journey, right? Going to college and coming out of college and starting to work and going like, well, day one, you don't have any experiences. So you can't just demand that you do what you want to do unless out
yeah.
of college you start your own business. And we see a lot of younger folks that they don't necessarily go for the corporate world, right? They
Yeah.
immediately go and maybe start their own business because they had a passion. Maybe they even started a business back in high school or even in college. And I admire that a lot. It takes a lot of guts, not easy to do. I haven't been part of several startups myself. It's very hard and very stressful to do that. But for other people, I would say one of the recommendations I always have is go and look for jobs that spend a lot of time in training and learning new skills, because
Mhm.
you do have, especially in the world of supply chain, there are some things that you need to learn. And learning can be very passionate as well, right? It's always exciting to learn new things, to work with new people, to work in new environments, and that can sometimes mean working in, whether it's in the US, in different states or in different countries. Go look for those opportunities, and that's what I really set out to do when I came out of college. There was a brief stint I worked for my dad, but I quickly realized two things: I wasn't passionate about construction, and
Mhm.
I was just seen as the boss's son. And after a year and a half, I told my dad, "Is I got to go on my own. I got to find my own passion because construction isn't it, and I want to do something that I can contribute to my own merit rather than, hey, you just got the job because you're the boss's son." And by coincidence, kind of found that supply chain was something that I really liked, and especially logistics. But I started with Ernst and Young, and what was one of the reasons I started with Ernst and Young was because I really saw that they spent weeks and weeks every year in training and education. And so I said, not the best paid jobs. I had people that I was in college with that started with way higher paid jobs. But after doing that, I went to GE and worked for GE Capital. In those first 4 to 8 years that are kind of quite formative once you come out of college, I learned so much. I had so many great opportunities. And then I found that early 30s, I kind of had a better idea of what I wanted to do, but I was also in a better position to kind of choose what I wanted to do rather than just going for the roles I could get, is I could start kind of making more demands of what I wanted to do because people were interested based on all that education, based on the training, based on the experiences that you created. So not automatically day one, jump right into it, but kind of weave your way. It's like anything, right? I mean, if you want to become the world's best, let's say snowboarder, right? That doesn't happen overnight. That's years and years and years of training. I was just listening to Arnold Schwarzenegger's audiobook where he tells people about, finding your passion, how you get there. And he's talking about his early bodybuilding days. And it was like he worked out twice a day for 4 hours. And obviously, you have before he became Mr. Olympia, Mr. Universe, and became famous, he had those 8 to 10 years where he trained and no one knew him. He wasn't successful. So a lot of becoming to success is also preparing for your own success. And that can be different forms for different people. But I think that's one thing that people shouldn't shy away from is put in the hard work and kind of put in the foundations for your future success.
I agree. I think even one level closer to the floor of that is what I've kind of realized maybe have is to put in that really extra effort when you're younger and you've got less obligations of your time outside of work and you've just got the physical stamina to just put in those long hours. I'm grateful. I think that I put in all that extra effort early on and it helped to catapult things and make life a little easier later on due to that extra effort, I think, early in their career. Would you agree?
Yeah, I fully agree. And the other part is the networking, right? I think you're obviously very good at that as well because supply chain is all about. It's not always what you know, but also who you know. I see you at all the conferences, and I think we were at. It's probably I think it was at Rela where we saw each other as well. And I
Hmm.
think you told me like day two or day three, you already had interviewed like almost close to 100 people. So being able to go out there, put yourself out there, making those connections, meeting with those people is incredibly valuable. So it's not just what you know, but who you know. Go out there, meet people, talk to them, learn from each other, and that's another part of building that road towards your own success.
Yep. Yep. Let's talk a little bit more through your sort of resume. LinkedIn tells me that you and I both worked at PepsiCo. I was there maybe around the time you were. It looks like actually I was an intern though, and you were doing some different things. So, can you kind of talk through your experiences that you've had throughout your career?
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. Like I said, right? I won't go through that again, but I really started with working for my dad, and then I said no, not for me, and then was with Ernst and Young for 4 years. This was in Belgium. Mainly spent my time in the Benelux, but the good thing was I was exposed to a lot of different industries. So saw a lot of companies, manufacturing, retail, etc., where we were really learning about their processes and where I could really see things at work because part of what I did was also on the audit side. So you saw a lot of the processes, but you also went in to do inventory control. You went into the manufacturing location. So many different companies in different industries, learned a lot. And then when I went to GE, obviously GE had a lot of their manufacturing businesses. That's changed a little bit because some of those businesses got sold over the years.
Hmm.
And then part of GE Capital in mergers and acquisition, they decided they wanted to form a logistics company that provide logistics services to all the GE manufacturing businesses in Europe. And they did that as a joint venture with Penske, the large 3PL in the US, to form Penske Logistics Europe. A couple of different things there. One was it was the first time I was part really of a team starting a brand new company. Secondly, was heavily focused on logistics, and thirdly, although we started with the non-asset based 3PL, which was a copy of the 3PL base in Reading, Pennsylvania for Penske, we're also focused on acquiring asset based businesses in trucking and warehousing. And so that was another part where I went deep into the operation. So now we started acquiring. We acquired one of the largest logistics companies, asset based, both trucking as well as warehouse operations in the Benelux. And all of a sudden, I started running operations, which is quite different than being more on the outside from a consulting perspective, but learned a ton. I would say that was my baptism by fire. But then at the same time, in the late 90s, obviously learning from Penske in the US, it was important to use technology. So we implemented the first TMS that we did, which was I2 at the time, second implementation of the I2 TMS, which is the ITLS acquisition in Europe. We started on the asset-based side, implementing routing as well as telematics. Again, telematics when it was these huge boxes, satellite communication. You were barely wanted to ping the truck because it was so expensive. It was like $1 million per ping, right? Because it goes through satellite. But that's really when, for me, the light went on where I go like, okay, so you have logistics, you have the operation and business process work, and you have technology, where the intersection of that, when it all came together, I go like, that's what I love. So
Nice.
again, kind of going into it and trying to learn, I was also very open to willing to learn and willing to look for opportunities. But when I found it, it kind of clicked saying, that's what I want to do. And to be honest, most of you redact most of the rest of my career has been mainly focused on logistics, and the intersection of logistics with technology. Where after that, I joined a couple of technology startups where I worked. Meantime, I'd moved to the US, and because of all the travel and a second kid on the way, I decided I wanted to have a more local job and joined PepsiCo. But again, on the logistics and technology side, supporting all the different PepsiCo businesses. So I worked for the corporation, and I supported Frito-Lay and Quaker and Tropicana worldwide around all their logistics applications, warehouse, fleet, transportation. Did that for 10 years. In the meantime, I was a Gartner seat holder. And at the end of the 10 years, Gartner came to me and said, Bart, we're rapidly expanding our supply chain research, and we're looking for someone that has kind of your logistics background and your expertise to help, kind of increase the resources we have on the analyst side. So I joined Gartner. So I was at PepsiCo 2005 until 2014, almost 10 years. And then I joined Gartner in 2014. I was a VP of research there, focused on transportation technology. So some of the folks that read like magic quadrants for TMS, real-time visibility, a lot of other work that I did. Because when I joined, we had one MQ in the transportation space, which was TMS. And then we started writing about freight out and payment and procurement and yard management, all those different things that we created. And was there for 8 years. It was a great experience, learned a lot of access to larger and maybe medium-sized companies and users, but obviously also a lot of vendor companies, a lot of venture capital, private equity companies who, especially the last years that I was there, were heavily investing in supply chain and transportation tech. And then I left Gartner, went to Project 44, so my third logistics technology company that I went to work for. And then in August of 2023, I had the opportunity to go independent, had a couple of options, but decided, you know what, I don't necessarily want to work for another company anymore. I don't want to go back to corporate America. And throughout the years, as I created those relationships, a lot of people had asked, Bart, we need someone like you to help us out. Can you advise us? And at Gartner, I wasn't allowed to do that. And at Project 44, I just really didn't have the time to do it. So I made a couple of calls to my network and said, hey, you guys still interested in that? And they were. And so I just created my LLC, which in the US is incredibly easy to do. A lot of other countries in the world, like in Belgium, it'd be hard to do. It's a lot more convoluted. It's a lot more complex. You have to put some money down, and using lawyers to set up an LLC in the US takes a couple of days, takes probably like $500 to get that registered, and you're off and running. And there's been no looking back since. And I find that the ability, right? And I would say I still work hard, but I feel like almost like when people say, how do you define being retired? I would always say it's like not having to necessarily just purely work for a paycheck, but having the ability to do what you want to do and who you want to do it with. And I feel like I have that opportunity now, which obviously I'm grateful to all my customers to do that. But it's been very liberating to then say, after a certain amount of time that you've put into the industry, more than 30 years, to then be able to kind of put all those puzzle pieces together to help out other companies, whether it's, companies that are incredibly small, pre-revenue companies that I help, but also larger company. Manhattan Associates, probably my largest companies in terms of their revenue, that I help as well, and then see everyone in between and work with a lot of different VCs around some of their investing. And it's incredibly, I would say rewarding. And it's incredibly powerful to see where we've come kind of in supply chain logistics versus when I started in the 90s, right? Which is completely different world.
I like it. I like it. I think that you and I first crossed paths when you were at Project 44 and you were giving a presentation at TCU to CSCMP. I think it was maybe a freight outlook or a future outlook type of deal. That was the first time I ever heard your name. So just to let you know, that's how far back our timeline goes. It's just a few years, I think. So looking at your kind of various experience of working in logistics throughout the world, one question I've always wanted to ask someone who's from Europe and spent a lot of time in the logistics scene there and very familiar is, can you kind of put somewhat succinctly like what your perspective is on the difference of how Europe handles logistics and freight and transportation versus here in the US?
Yeah. Obviously, one of the biggest differences is that Europe is, although you have the European Union, every country is still its individual country with completely different legislation, with completely different restrictions around things like weight in a truck. If you look at a bill of lading in the US, we have one bill of lading for at least the US, but in Europe, that bill of lading, or they call it CMR, is different for every single country.
Wow.
So the ability to transport something, and obviously a lot of the transportation when I was part of Penske, we did short haul, very niche transportation, but obviously a lot of it was long haul, right? Because a lot of manufacturing is done cheaply in Eastern Europe or in Spain or in Italy, and then all that product comes back up north, or raw materials come from the north and go back down south. So a lot of it is long distance, and you cross six, seven, eight different countries with all different legislation. So a big part of the difference is one, having to deal with multiple countries, multiple different legislations. The second part is obviously the language difference and a lot of cultural differences. So, being from a country like Belgium, where, first of all, in our country, we have three languages, four language communities, you almost have to be a chameleon in your own country. But then dealing with other countries, the culture in northern France is different from southern France. So, you have to interact a little bit differently. I would say in the US, it's maybe like that in a smaller level, where if you deal with someone from New York, is different from someone in Texas. But being able to deal with people and collaborate with people and making connections is quite different. You have to be more culturally sensitive. I would say that's definitely a different part. And then there's some really, from a logistics perspective, some core differences as well. Where if you look, for example, the broker industry, right? That's not quite as big in Europe as it is here in Northern America, where you have tens of thousands of these freight brokers. A lot of companies deal directly with carriers, but the other part is in Europe, carriers are not always pure asset based carriers. They're large transportation companies who have a certain amount of assets, and then they use subcontractors. And then you have sometimes where you go four, five, six levels deep, where one company subcontracts to another company who subcontracts to another company, et cetera, which makes things a lot more complex. In the US, you don't typically have that. You either deal directly with a JB Hunt or another carrier, or you go through a freight broker. So some of the workings of logistics and transportation are quite different as well. And I think what I really found is having the ability to kind of be able to relate to the cultural sensitivities to Europe and the way business is done there. And the US is really working with global companies, really given me sometimes a little bit of an edge up, right? I would say even with Gartner, when I was with Gartner, it's very interesting. Just in, for example, an analyst speaking at an event, our British colleagues, when they came to the US, the US reaction was like, oh, that guy sounds so smart because he had a British accent, English accent, right? The opposite was we used to have our European event in London. An American would come to London, and when an American spoke, it was the total opposite. You even saw it in the scores for presentations and how that was reflected. So there is a lot of different aspects to cultural sensitivity, to the way people are perceived, because again, supply chain is still run by people. But I think, and there again, if we talk about, and I think we'll talk about maybe a little bit at the end of the show, it may be like for students, right? If back in college, what would you advise? But I will give a little
Let's just go
tidbit
for it. We don't
at
have
this
to,
point
or
in
you want
time.
to.
Is like, yeah, if you ever have an opportunity, either with a large corporation or any corporation, to have opportunities to go outside of your own country or your own core area and go and work there, I think the people capabilities, the people connections you make, the cultural sensitivity, the understanding of how the world, because supply chain is so global now. When I started, they were regional, so I could have stayed in Europe and learned all about it. But then now that they're so global, I wouldn't have the global understanding. So, you know, don't just go look for opportunities in the sense of what is that job description, but also where is it? What's the type of company? What's the industry? But also the location. I would recommend to anyone, go and study abroad, go and work abroad. If nothing else, you get a lot better understanding of how the world works. And I would say, lastly, you would be more appreciative of the US, because a lot of people always go like, oh, the US this and the US that. I go live somewhere else. You would really appreciate how well we have it here if you would understand all the other places in the world. I've not find in all my travels around the world a place that I would rather live than here in the US.
Well, thanks for going ahead and taking care of that advice to students question that I like to ask everyone. Maybe we can take a quick second to talk about your career low light and career highlight. You've seen a lot of things and done a lot of things. I would really be interested to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I will say my answer might be a little bit different than what you expect, but I'd say the low light and the highlight came both from the same experience, and I'll
Okay,
explain a little bit. It was
I
the
like it.
first startup that I was with early 2000. I moved to England to join a startup. This was like at the height of the dot-com era. Everything was going to go digital. A lot of belief there, a lot of investment behind it, similar to what we saw a few years back. So I joined the company. It was like the fourth person on the team, and we were doing incredibly well. Not only was it exciting to start something new, something that was never done before, a lot of learnings as a young guy. I was, just around 30 at the time, and so it was incredibly gratifying. But unfortunately, about a year or a year and a half later, the whole dot-com bubble burst, and all these people that had signed up had written a letter of intents with us. All of a sudden, said, no, that digital thing, I don't think so. And so all of a sudden, we went from something that looked like was going to be incredibly successful on paper. You had the high valuations, similar to what we've seen the last few years with companies, and that all crumbled kind of to like almost nothing, almost overnight, right? So that was kind of, I would say, the low light, in the sense that you build up something that you really believe in, put a lot of hard work in, something you thought could be really successful, and then it just didn't work out because external influences, right? And I always say, like, even the most successful surfer, right? You can't win a world championship if you don't have that right wave behind you. Now with waves, you can wait and see if the wave's going to come, and that obviously is part of their talent. But there are external circumstances that influence you as well. So I would say that was kind of a low light, in the sense that that first real feeling of defeat, because when you're young, right, your career aspirations, and you grow in roles, and you do these things, and you're successful up to a point, or what you think is successful, at least when you don't know anything when you're young, and then you have something like that happen. So it can be very crushing, but at the same time, I go like, the people say, if you would have known, would you do something different? I said no, because I learned so much in the experience. And part of that, you also learn a little bit about humility, to go like, hey, even the most successful things can still go wrong. I even see that now when on LinkedIn, you sometimes see people speak and critique these startup companies that fail, right? And things that don't work out. It's incredibly hard to start a company and to grow it. And like I said, some of it isn't always under your control. You could even get the most investment that there is out there. That doesn't always guarantee that you're going to be super successful. I see that a lot, besides supply chain. I'm a foodie. I love wine. You see restaurants, sometimes you go, this was the best food I've ever had in my life, yet the restaurant went bankrupt. Why? Because people's taste all of a sudden changed. It's like, yeah, we don't like that food anymore. We want to go with the cool new food. And really, as a restaurant, you can't necessarily do anything about it, unless you would say, yeah, I'll hop on the bandwagon and start serving that kind of food. So I would say within that same experience, it was kind of the low light and the highlight. And even to this day, I would say I take those experiences from that startup still with me in the way you interact with people, the way you even with some of the startups that I work with or people that I know from the industry have an understanding for the hard work that goes behind that. And I think having compassion is very important as well when you interact with people. And that sometimes you see lacking, especially when, you know, nowadays with social media, when it's easy to have an opinion. We're all still people. And even when big companies go bankrupt, you can give them all the critique, even when it's true that maybe they mismanaged it. It's still, you're still talking about people and people get affected by that. So never, you know, kind of lose sight of the fact that when you talk about companies, you talk about people, people's passions, people's livelihoods. And I think that's very important to keep into mind that even when you're doing business, you know, you're still creating personal relationships.
I appreciate the call out about that, and it seems like part of your brand. And just catching up with you here recently and chatting today, it feels like the people part of the industry is a big part of your passion. Um, can we talk a little bit about how you stay connected? That networking bit, organizations, events. What do you do to kind of keep yourself out in front of your community, your tribe in supply chain, and any words of advice for other folks?
Yeah, a couple of aspects to that, Nathan, is obviously, you know, the good thing of getting older is that you met a lot of people in your life. And obviously part of that is keeping those connections and
Mhm.
spending time on those connections, right? Same in my personal life, you know, pretty much my entire family's in Belgium. Most of my friends are in Belgium. I have three godchildren in Belgium. It takes a little bit more effort to stay connected with them 5,000 miles away than someone that's local. Similar to supply chains, you have people that you've met, they're all over the world, is just connecting. Second part is obviously for people, even if you're not in the midst of it, like for example, I wasn't at ProMat last week, you were, right? But it's obviously the use of social media is a great way to showing people that what you're doing and sharing things to a larger audience rather than just one on one. And you see that especially LinkedIn, right? People, when I meet them, they always go, "Hey, Bart, you seem super busy," because we see all this stuff on LinkedIn, right? Sometimes that's a correct perception. Sometimes that's just perception, but that it's another way of reaching out to people, letting them know what you're up to and creating networks. The other part, and we talked about this before the call, one thing I always have as a rule is I never say no to a conversation, right? Maybe with the exception of LinkedIn when someone's clearly selling you something. But when people reach out, it could be college student, could be people starting their career. It's people starting a business. It's people that I've known for a long time that are reaching out because they just lost their job and trying to look for your help or advice. And I never say no because it's a personal business, meaning you never know what that conversation is going to lead to. And I think alluded to it kind of in our pre-call as well, but there's a mindset change when you're young and when you automatically, and it's very normal that you do a lot of stuff for yourself. It's like, I want to become successful. I want to make money. I want to have a certain job. But what really hit me when I turned 50, and I think a lot of people go through the same thing, is when your mindset changed a little bit from what can I do for Bart and to make Bart successful to what is going to be ultimately my legacy. Because reality is when you're 50 years old and you've been working in the industry for 28 years old, you've probably done 2/3 of your work, right? Unless you, like some of the people that I admire that have been in the industry and still are in the industry at the age of 75 and older. It's incredible. They're still going and hopefully I can do that. I'll have the physical health to be able to do that. But it's like, what can I do to leave my legacy? And part of that is interacting with people. So when people, and I would say this is a call out, if anyone is interested in talk to me or I can help them in any way, you know, connect with me through LinkedIn. I'll always have the conversation and you never know what comes out of it. And I think it's also one of the most gratifying part of our industry, of the supply chain industry, that it is a people industry. Even with all the talks about AI now, it's going to automate everything. I don't believe in that. It's going to help us as people in a great way, but it's still a people business. And so I find it very interesting, like what we're doing here, is talking to you and being able to reach out to other people. That's the most powerful part. And people sometimes think, Bart, you know, a lot of you had a lot of experiences, and they think that that's the biggest achievement, right? And I would say the biggest compliment I've ever had wasn't like, hey, Bart, you know more than anything about logistics, and I probably don't, or anything like that. The biggest compliment I've ever had was a company reaching out to me. They weren't even doing anything logistics or remotely logistics, completely different area. And they said, Bart, I don't know what it is we could do together, but we like you so much we would want to work with you. And I think that really is kind of the most important part, is that kind of people feel like, one, you can help them in some way beyond your knowledge, but that you're liked as a person. And again, we talked about things like cultural sensitivity, but also people sensitivity. And you know, it also leads to why, if you look at what I write, you'll never see me really write anything negative or negative comments on the industry, because I understand the difficulty people going through. But I really want to be kind of like a cheerleader for the industries. Yes, we know there's a lot of bad things happening. Yes, we have a lot of disruptions. Stay positive and help each other. I think that's more important than anything else.
I love it. If you scroll down to the bottom of my main homepage on my website, you'll see in the contact us section, there's one of my favorite quotes from Bill Nye, the Science Guy, that says, "Everyone that you ever meet knows something that you don't." And That's, I would say, it's in my top five, quotes to live by. And so, similar to you, anyone who wants to talk with me reaches out and they're not trying to sell me some AI enabled sales force sort of thing, then I'll take that call. It's because everyone, every conversation you have, you can either get a nugget of intelligence or wisdom out of it, or it's a connection that can pay dividends, or you can provide something to that person, and that's really it's what it's all about.
If you're willing to listen, you can find a nugget of wisdom in every conversation you have in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there was a few of them in this past conversation with you, Bart. I feel like we just barely scraped the surface of everything, but I appreciate you coming on and sharing a little bit about your story and about your perspectives and how you see the world of supply chain. I feel like it's something that maybe a lot of people should hear and consider taking some of those to heart about thinking about the people part of the business more. So I'll probably see you at a happy hour or conference here pretty soon. But until then, take care and I'll catch you later.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Great being on your show.